which punishment, either real or imagined, sounds light or not a big deal at first, but is actually horrific to experience. Outlawry. To be declared an outlaw today, we think of an outlaw as just anybody who breaks the law regularly. Back in the day, though, it was a punishment. If you were declared outlaw, that meant that you were literally outside of the law and could claim no protection from it. If someone didn't like you, they could freely beat you, rob you, torture you, or even kill you. When the stories refer to Robin Hood as an outlaw, that's what they're talking about. It's not a romantic, heroic, swashbuckling thing. It's the state of having no claim to any legal protection at all. The king, or whoever he appoints, takes your land. Anybody who wants it can take your stuff, and anybody who doesn't like you can just beat you to death without consequences. They can also put a bounty on your head and have people hunting you to claim it. What do you think would happen if you lost all protection from the law, and anybody who brought your head to the courthouse could claim a year's salary as a reward? Goat licking. In medieval times you would get your feet strapped between two wooden boards and they'd be sprinkled in salt, or similar, so animals, mainly goats, would lick them. Seems like it'd tickle at first, but they won't stop licking. Apparently they'd lick flesh off until they hit bones. Kneeling in salt. When I was 16, my mother told me if I kept my attitude up I'd be kneeling in salt. Being a dumb kid, I was like, oh whatever, it's just salt. Well, I kept that attitude up. My mom sprinkled a light dusting of salt on the tile floor in the kitchen and I had to kneel in salt for a half hour. The grains cut my knees and burned the wounds. I'm 32 now and I still have scars on my knees. I will add this before I hit reply. No, this was abuse. My mom was pregnant at the time and not in a good place mentally. My sister is now 16 and has never even had as much as a slap. Just recently my sister told me she thinks I was just a bad kid if mom did all that to me. I told my mother about the conversation after and my mother said you weren't a bad kid, none of you were. I just had a temper and I didn't know how to control it. I'll admit, I'm an adult now with 2 kids of my own and hearing her say that made me cry on the way home. I knew in my head I wasn't a bad child. I rarely got into trouble. Never did drugs. I just had an attitude. But I hadn't realized how heavy my heart was. I was the first of 3 kids. I got the worst of it, and I always blamed myself. Even when I was finally over it and rebuilt relationship with my mom, I blamed myself. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear her say that until she did. This was 3 weeks ago, and I'm tearing up just typing this. Closing your hand around a chunk of salt water ice, and holding it there, dubbed the Salt and Ice Challenge, where people hold onto it for as long as they can stand. It can lead to frostbite injuries similar to 2nd and 3rd degree burns. It also essentially fuses to your skin, so if you try to open your hand it will rip off skin. You need to use warm water to detach it. I did this about 20 years ago, before it was a thing on social media. It sucks. Edit. With the attention this is getting, I feel obligated to say ... Definitely do not try this. Tickling. No joke. The Nazis used this as a form of torture in some cases. It doesn't leave a mark, so it's also used in environments like mental facilities where patients may be restrained and staff go on a power trip. Extreme cases can result in incontinence, vomiting and a loss of consciousness due to the inability to breathe. It's also easier for the torturer to do it for a long time without it wearing away at their conscience because the victim is involuntarily laughing, so it's easy to pretend that it's not that bad. Having to play with chicken. My grandpa always told me, when the neighbor's kid would misbehave, 100 years plus since then, his parents would lock him into the chicken habitat and put some liquid and/or meat on his feet. The chickens would peck at his feet and he would have to flee constantly until he was too tired to. Then he would be released. Since you said imaginary, there was a punishment shown on Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, that Black Mirror copied a couple times, and science fiction has used as a concept, likely before DS9. The concept is time dilation, the idea that time takes place at a different rate in the real world than it does in some other. So for the punishment, the character Miles O'Brien was strapped in a chair for an hour and sedated, and he dreamed he served a 10-year prison sentence, or maybe it was longer, but in his mind, he was trapped in this cell for years and years. In the dream, he may have been deprived of food, he was definitely deprived of social interaction, but at the end of it, he woke up, and only an hour had passed. Actually, the best Next Generation episode, The Inner Light, played with time dilation as well. Same with the best Voyager episode, Blink of an Eye. Standing at parade rest without being able to talk for 5 hours. In basic training, someone got caught stealing food from the fact no more than 20 minutes after we had been yelled at for people doing that. As a punishment, we stood at parade rest from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. without being able to talk and with at least one DS watching us at all times. I don't know how to describe it, but your brain can only come up with so much to do for 5 hours while not moving. Chinese water drop torture. Victims were strapped down so that they could not move, and cold or warm water was then dripped slowly onto a small area of the body, usually the forehead. The forehead was found to be the most suitable point for this form of torture because of its sensitivity. Prisoners could see each drop coming, and after long durations were gradually driven frantic as a perceived hollow would form in the center of the forehead. My cousin, 10-year-old, quite agile, never sits still. Once he troubled my aunt so much that she punished him. His punishment was to sit still on the bed and do nothing. No TV, no playing either on phone or with his toys, not even speaking. No one was allowed to come to his room so that he even can't watch others. He asked her to read his textbook as he thought studying would lessen her anger, but she denied even studying. He had to sit completely still. Initially that punishment seemed quite simple to me, but what impact it had on a small child was huge. This punishment tortures you by boring you, which a small child can't take. At last he broke down crying, after which he was pardoned. Being found not guilty by reason of insanity. No matter the length of sentence you're given, it is up to the doctors to determine when you can be released. A sentence of 10 years in a psychiatric facility could mean 20, 30, or life. The doctors will only release you when they determine it's safe for you to re-enter society and you are no longer a threat. What doctor is going to release someone and take the chance you'll re-offend? Almost none. You'll also be given medications that have terrible side effects. You'll put on a bunch of weight, feel sleepy all the time, dizzy, and eventually develop repetitive movements. You'll be in the general population with other people suffering from severe mental illness, which can drive you crazy in itself. The upside is it may be slightly cleaner than regular prison. You have a little more space to move around the entire unit, even though it's going to be small. And eventually you can earn day passes. Compared to regular prison, it may be a little better overall, but it is still a horrible way to spend your life. It's also incredibly difficult to have this defense apply to your case. So if someone does a crime and thinks they can just plead insanity and be out in 10 years, they are most likely not going to be found insane. My dad told me about a punishment that was given in schools when he was growing up. Born in 1954, which was you had to go to the side of the aisle of desks and squat down, into like the Asian, Russian squat stance, and hold it for the rest of class. He said it never sounded bad, but after a while your muscles and knees would lock up, and at the end of class, in order to get out of the position, you had to fall onto your side or back to the floor to let your legs relax enough to allow you to move and use them. He told me when I was super young, but it's always stuck with me cause I was so surprised that something that seemingly small would cause so much pain and loss of control. You essentially got insane Charlie horses when you dropped out of the position. Whiteness, literally being surrounded by nothing in a pure white room listening to white noise all day. It seems calm, peaceful after a while, right? Well, after a while you lose sense of other colors, emotions, you forget who you are, and it's very hard to recover. You never get used to it. It's very hard to be in the real world afterwards after being stripped of all versions of reality for months on end. This is what they did in the Middle East for a while. Waterboarding. If any of you kids don't know, this was a big debate back in the early 2000s. Some people were calling it torture, others were more or less like it's literally just pouring water on someone's face. What's the big deal? Now, when you put it like that, yeah, what's the big deal? Take someone, make them lay down and hold them down so they can't move, pour water on their face. What's the big deal? I remember one conservative radio host got the bright idea to prove live and on the air that it's not as bad as they are saying by having his staff waterboard him on air. And you know what? I respect this guy for doing this. He had a strongly held belief and he was willing to go through it to try and prove his point. He lasted all of 15 seconds before he taped out of it, hacked and coughed for about 5 seconds, and finally managed to say definitely torture before suggesting they go to a break so he can recover from that. Good on him for admitting he was wrong. I'm stretching the definition of light here by a long way, but when I heard of death by 1,000 cuts I thought I would be someone giving you a bunch of cuts until you bleed out. Painful, bit extreme, but the reality is so much worse. Turns out cuts is a bit of a mistranslation, and it should really be slices. The executioner slices big chunks off your body systematically, up to muscles and whole limbs, with the aim of keeping you alive as long as possible. There are a handful of pictures of the process being done which are just about the most horrific thing I have ever seen. Any punishment where, even if it doesn't physically harm the person, you make them do it for a long time. I was punished at a very young age, somewhere between 7–10, for not being manly, so my stepfather, bastard of all time, decided to toughen me up. He sat me down on the sofa, and told me, under no circumstances was I allowed to leave the sofa. If I needed the toilet I was to tell him and he would let me go to the bathroom, but if I took longer than a few minutes, he would come in, to make sure I wasn't hiding. Now that doesn't sound so bad sitting on the sofa. PSH, that wasn't my punishment. My punishment to toughen me up was I was to sit on the sofa, not moving, and not allowed to look away, and he put on horror movie after horror movie, after horror movie, all day, from morning to my bedtime, and these were 80s horror movies, Prince of Darkness, Poltergeist, Hellraiser, Night of the Demons, The Evil Dead, not the sequels, the Living Dead films. I love horror now that I am an adult. But for little kid me, I literally couldn't sleep properly or speak for a week. And I'm pretty sure I'm mentally messed up in some ways, but that was just an example of how much of an utter, and I'm sorry Americans, cunt this fucker was. In my home country, the penalty for rape and drug trafficking is whipping, with no limit, specific number to be set by the judge. First they clinically clear you for the punishment, then they get you in a bent-over pose while your ass is visible through a wooden frame. The torturer, a man in a legit hood, shows up and dips a horsewhip in medicine. The medicine serves two purposes. Firstly, it helps with slight healing during the whipping, in order to allow the prisoner more lashes during that sitting, and secondly because the medicine is sticky, causing the whip to stick into your flesh from the ass whenever it cracks. There's a very old video of it being carried out on a rapist on YouTube. My choice would be denying possessions and privileges. We use that in prison to control the most difficult inmates. Pain, solitary, things you might expect would work only escalate their misbehavior. There is research that sociopaths don't respond to emotional or physical efforts to control them, but taking their freedom and possessions does. So we'd stop their phone, mail, visits, commissary and recreation, and they became model inmates. Sitting in an empty room with literally nothing is the worst. There was an inmate, Thomas Silverstein, who murdered an officer, Gene Klutz, at Marion Penitentiary in 1983. He'd also killed 2 other inmates prior to that who were gang members opposed to the gang he belonged to. He was Aryan Brotherhood and they were DC blacks. After he killed Officer Klutz, he was placed in an empty cell in Atlanta Pen for a time till the Cuban riots and Atlanta was burned down, then in the basement of the federal prison in Leavenworth with nothing in it till 2005 when he was moved to the new administrative maximum prison in Florence, Colorado. He died there in 2019. So from 1983 till 2019 he was kept on no human contact status. According to federal law, the only things inmates are required is food, medical care, clothing and a place to exercise. Everything else is a privilege. Because the room was 8 by 8, it qualified as an exercise space. He was placed there and never left till he died. He complained about it any chance he got, calling it the worst torture a person could endure. Peter Early, in his book, The Hot House, asked about this punishment. The official answer is, we can't execute Silverstein, so we have no choice but to make his life a living hell. Otherwise other inmates will kill guards too. There has to be some supreme punishment. Every convict knows what Silverstein is going through. We want them to realize that if they cross the same line that he did, they will pay a heavy price. So thanks to my abusive dad, when I got in trouble I would have to get down in a seating position without a wall and chair with my arms out for at least 1 hour. Now doesn't so bad until your legs start to hurt. Soon your arms will start to get heavy, sweat could get in your eyes, and it's just an aching, writhing pain that just gets worse and worse. All the while you could not get up once to rest. Too high or too low, arms not straight out, then I would get hit. Add to the fact that my dad was never satisfied with anything about. I was put in this position a lot. As a kid, when I did something wrong I'd have to write the sentence 500 times as punishment. I remember having to sit in the car at a family reunion at probably 7 years old writing "I am a bad girl" 500 times because I'd taken a granola bar without asking. Writing "I am a bad girl" that many times, repeated for minor infractions and sentences like "I am a liar and no one likes liars" or "I ruined the day for my family," just sticks with you and becomes internalized. I'm 31 now. It's been a good 15 years since I've had to write these, but I still think them about myself. Something I actually did to myself. I needed to cut weight for a wrestling tournament in a drastic way. Because of a mix-up in weight classes I needed to drop 16 pounds overnight. Told my coaches that's not possible, just pull me from the roster, but my head coach pulls me aside and tells me there might be a way and you don't even have to work out. What you do is fill a bathtub up with the hottest water you can stand and add a bag of Epsom salt and some rubbing alcohol to the water. Go into the bathroom with a buddy, stuff towels under the doors so cool air can't get in, and then get in the tub neck deep. After 60 seconds your body will already be screaming to get out of the water because you're overheating. I stayed in for 45 minutes, adding more hot water every 2-3 minutes to ensure the hell never ended. The buddy is there to make sure you don't die. Sweat out 11 pounds in 45 minutes. This is a long-term one. but constant criticism. It's no big deal to be criticized here and there, but if you subject a person to it for years, especially if you're in a position of love/trust/authority, it's soul-crushing. I know a guy who was subjected to criticism his entire time growing up by his parents, and he's 60 now and simply cannot function in society. If you give him even the slightest criticism now, he becomes convinced you're his worst enemy.